To our very first episode of what we're going to be calling Deep Dives. This is a Sunday school class that's going to be coming at you for 4 straight weeks. This is the first one. The idea behind Deep Dives is to bring in a staff person from Chesterfield Pres every single week and just have a conversation, just talk. The purposes of that is going to be to get to know some staff people here at CPC, understand their lives, their stories a little bit better, but also to give these folks an opportunity to share with us how the Lord has worked and moved in their lives, and also share things like parts of God's Word that have helped shape them and move them to where they are. So we're going to really understand deeply how the Lord has worked in some folks' lives. We're going to have a little bit of fun, and we're going to laugh a little bit along the way as well. So we're really excited about this class. If you don't know, really quickly before we dive into this week, you can find us on YouTube Live, and you can also find us on live stream. So if you're on one of those now, you can also try us on another spot as well. And so the format, again, of the class is going to be an interview style where we're going to be just asking questions of folks. We're going to be looking at Hugh Barlett, our senior pastor this week. Thanks for being with us, Hugh.
Yeah, Tony, good to hang out here.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And then for the next 3 weeks, we're going to have a different staff person come in every single week. So again, my name's Tony Howard. I'm one of the pastors here at CPC, and we're happy to have you with us as you watch along and learn more and more. So Hugh, we're gonna start this week. By the way, again, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
We're going to start with your background. We're going to start with a little bit of a background. Now, you preach here, of course, almost every week.
Yep.
And you have been for
28 years now.
28 years
Right.
You've been here at CPC.
Right.
And so you tell stories about yourself. We have a vague understanding of kind of your background, but can you tell us a little bit about your childhood was in Chicago,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
How did that uniquely shape who you are,
Yeah.
just being a child of Chicago?
Yeah, I grew up, I say it oftentimes, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, which of course, I grew up in Morton Grove, is the town I grew up, Morton Grove, Illinois, which was 20 some miles outside of Chicago. So Baldwin,
right,
where I live now, 20 miles outside of
Sure.
St. Louis, feels very similar to me in a very similar economic and kind of setup. Suburban home, I mentioned we're a family, mom and dad and 6 kids, and I'm number 5. So right away, I'm born into a busy family,
right,
big family, 4 sisters, 2 guys, 2 brothers. And so, you know, when you asked me about doing this, telling a little about myself, the thing that's just sort of important about my growing up is I grew up in a family that was somewhat connected to each other, but not connected to our extended family. I didn't have grandmothers or grandparents or cousins or aunts and uncles living anywhere near us. And so it was mom and dad and the 6 kids in that suburban home really almost all my life until my senior year in high school when we moved. But so family was significant, we were intact, but I was one of the only extroverts. Now, again, I didn't know this growing up, of course, but I was the outgoing guy in the family. Of the 6 kids, I was the only one that was really involved in sports.
And where were you at in the birth order there?
I was number 5.
Number 5, okay.
And so we're a family that's pretty studious. And again, I have a sister who's 14 years older than I am. So she's going off to college when I'm 5 years old.
Wow.
So it's that kind of thing. She's going off to college.
That's a broad span.
Right,
Yeah.
big span. And so it's like there's a lot of coming and going. All 6 are not all together and everything. I'm at the end. My parents have been through a lot raising kids, so
Right.
they're tired, they're experienced, they're the best of the parenting
Sure.
came to us that were younger. But I needed more than my family, and so neighborhood is huge. Neighborhood was huge. So Lake Street is where I grew up, and Lake Street had about 12 homes, 3 vacant lots, which is important actually. And so growing up, I was allowed to roam my neighborhood, and that became a key part
Interesting.
of who I was.
One of the things we're going to do, and this is good for you that are viewing as well, is we're going to have these categories that we look at, these kind of little moments. And every single deep dives, we're going to ask folks about these categories. And our first category for today is actually going to be called childhood peak. So can you give us, you talk about growing up on Lake Street, the suburban neighborhood in the late 60s, early 70s. What's a story or a moment, a snapshot maybe, of your childhood that sort of sums up what that was like?
Yeah. It's funny to think back, and when you asked me about the Apex, there is a story that really is beautiful. Again, I wouldn't have grown up thought about this, but so you got to realize I grew up on Lake Street, and so my older brother, across the street, he had a friend named Jeff, and then next down the street there was Jamie, who was 3 years older than I, then Paul was a year older than I was, then Ray, and then Scott a year or two older. And so that's my street. These guys, we'd play roller skate hockey in the street, or we would play basketball or play football. I mentioned some vacant lots. So Lake Street was a group of guys that, along with their sisters, who would play occasional games like kick the can, but the guys hung out every day. We just come out and we begin to play various games, whatever, and we would play sports till dinner, till after breakfast, till lunch, after lunch, till breakfast. But then when I went to grade school, I made a new group of friends. Again, stayed connected to the neighborhood, but then these were 2 or 3 blocks away were my Nelson School friends. Okay. So this are the people you heard about in sermons. There's Pete Romano, who was really my best friend.
He's famous around here.
Yeah, he is. Bob Paganucci and Bob Rapecki.
That's a hall of fame of kid names.
It is. It is. David Davis, Mike Schmidt, Dave Schamberg, Tommy Ugier.
Ugier.
Yeah, Tommy didn't make a lot of stories. Tommy was, so you had this eclectic group of folks, many of them, some of them Polish American, because that's Chicago, and these guys are Roman Catholic, almost all of them. I didn't grow up in the church. They had a church kind of environment, but that group centered not on the neighborhood, but it's centered in this place called Okido Park, which was in Chicago. They built these park district little parks in the middle of neighborhoods, and they weren't really organized like select sports. They were just open. They had a baseball field and a basketball court and a playground, and the kids could just come and play. And so that's the way my life was. Once I hit first grade, second grade, third grade, I would hop on my bike. In the morning, I'd either play on Lake Street with my friends there, or I'd get and drive 3 or 4 blocks to Okido Park, and I would play sports and do activities with the guys that were part of Okido Park.
That's a lot of fun.
So you mentioned the Apex. So the Apex thing happens, I think, in 5th or 6th grade.
This is your athletic Apex?
Well, this is like my childhood Apex.
This is the childhood
Apex.
Apex.
This is the childhood moment and it just shows. And when I look back, it shows a little bit about me.
Yeah.
I literally, planned. I created this game a baseball game between Lake Street and Okido Park, where we basically played each other. And now again,
and you organized the whole thing.
I organized. It was during the middle of the day.
That's
again,
impressive.
we were all, so Lake Street played Okido. We played a double header. We played before lunch and after lunch, and each side won 1 game, so that saved the relationships. But you didn't have enough. You didn't have 9 guys, so you played half field, which is you played pitcher, shortstop, third baseman, left fielder, center fielder. The other team caught. So you had 5 or 6 guys from each side, and you could only hit to left field and center. And all the rest. So it was kind of a crazy thing, and it was just a wild organizational game. But the fact that I look back and I think, the fact that I was able to pull these guys, some a little older, some my age, together to play against each other, was kind of a picture of my childhood. I was able to bridge a lot of gaps, and I had a lot of friends, and it was really a lot of fun. That's where I found a lot of my identity, was making connections like that.
So it sounds to me that your childhood was really the Sandlot in a lot of ways. Oh. You got the names, you got the kid names right, and you got the baseball teams. I mean, that's great.
Sandlot is exactly, we would show up.
Right.
And again, I mentioned before we got turned on the tape here that folks today maybe can't understand, like in both neighborhoods, Okido Park or Lake Street, let's say there are 12 homes on that street, 11, all the families are together, husband, moms and dads. I didn't know anybody who got divorced. And number two, 11 of the 12 moms were stay-at-home moms. So one mom, very strange to us, worked. When I went to grammar school, I walked 2 blocks to my grammar school. We walked home for lunch.
Wow.
And then went back after lunch. And there were, in the school of hundreds, there were a dozen kids whose moms worked, so they had to stay at school that hour. And we felt sorry for them. It was a different culture, a different time. So there was a kind of a strange combination of, we had parents around all the time, but our parents didn't hover. There were no select sports at the same, there was no kind of organized stuff. It was kids were free to go and do. And
it's a beautiful picture of childhood.
Wonder years.
Absolutely. Wonder Years is another example. Sandlot and Wonder Years. I want to shift. So that was a good warm-up of understanding a little bit of your background.
Right.
I want to shift to the more hard-hitting things, which would be It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
Right. We can't have an interview, of course, with Hugh Barlett without asking a little bit about A Wonderful Life. So the context behind this, for those of you who don't know, is that, we expect on Christmas season,
Yeah.
there's going to be an illustration here for us
Yeah.
involving Bedford Falls, involving George Bailey. We're going to
Yeah.
hear about It's a Wonderful Life. And you'll even sprinkle some It's a Wonderful Life just for good measure throughout the rest of the year.
Gotta
as
love
well.
it all
You gotta
throughout
have
the
it.
year. Yeah.
So clearly this is a movie that you not only have seen, but it's resonated with you in some way for
Yeah.
you to use it as you have. So can you tell us a little bit, just quickly, when did you first see this movie?
Right.
When you first introduced It's a Wonderful Life, and why did that movie resonate so much with you?
Right. So, a couple things. Movies. Again, I went to movie theaters growing up. Saw the Dr. Dolittle. Saw the, the kids movies. And would go sometimes with parents. The Mary Poppins.
Yep.
But movies weren't as everywhere. We didn't have cable. So I did not see It's a Wonderful Life and watch it until I was in college.
Wow.
Judy and I saw it together for the first time. We were watching it, and I think it was one of those VHS tapes. We rented it, and we watched it. One of my years in college when I was starting to watch movies. You know how you start watching movies a little more seriously. Mm-hmm. But I happened to rent It's a Wonderful Life, and
this was before it made its rotation on kind of cable television.
It had started to do that a few years, but not, it was, so that we're talking 1978, 79, 80, I'm starting to watch it, and I'm seeing it on maybe 81, and Judy and I saw it, and it hit me at a time in my life when I just was overwhelmed by George Bailey, who he was, and I'd been a Christian a little while, and I could understand what it was like to have ambition. I was a college kid looking about my life, and to sort of see in this movie this guy who gave up, he sacrificed, and it just was incredibly powerful to me, and also kind of strange and distant because, again, I didn't grow up in Bedford. I grew up in a place, but I'd moved, and now I was moved again, and I was I didn't feel the roots of a Bedford Falls in the same way. So there was part of the movie that was attractive to me, and part of it was kind of amazing. And I made a Christian connection to it in the sense that sacrifice for the gospel would mean something. So right from my earliest time watching it, it meant something deep to me.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And you've obviously been able to mine that movie for a lot of spiritual connection and spiritual illustrations for yourself and for our congregation over the years, so many different times. And that actually shifts us. So you started to watch that movie after you came to faith. So you began to see some of those spiritual parallels that are present in that movie. Let's shift to your testimony now. Can you talk a little bit? I mean, we've heard kind of little bits and pieces about how you came to know the Lord. We know that your sister, introduced Jesus to you. Yeah. Before then, you were somewhat unfamiliar with the gospel. So can you walk us a little bit about how Jesus has worked in your life, how he called you to himself and brought you to faith?
So, again, I grew up in that neighborhood. My family didn't attend church. I think I say that fairly often. We only attended church. There was a small church not too far from us that we attended maybe 2 or 3 times at Christmas.
Right.
Or Easter, not very often on Easter. So Easter Sunday morning was a basket of grass with M&Ms and that kind. It was a typical American Easter. Christmas was, we went to church maybe on Christmas Eve, but it was all about the presents and the excitement. We opened Christmas morning, and Christmas morning was a sacred time for our family. We loved gift giving, and it was a time of intimacy. But it had really very little to do with Jesus. My family. So I grew up in a very broad-minded, intellectual kind of family, college, educated, interested in the humanities. It was not uncommon at our dinner table. One of the other sacred realities of our family was we ate together. So mom and dad would be there in their places, 4, 5, 6 kids, whoever was home, would be around the table, and we would have conversation. And there was often discussion and ideas and debate. And it happened sometimes where the dictionary would come off the bookshelf or an encyclopedia would come out. Maybe the way we Google stuff today.
Right.
We were doing that in the paperback, hardback world. We were talking about issues and ideas. And it became clear to me that Christianity, and I knew that I was not Catholic. I grew up in a neighborhood that was Catholic and Jewish. I wasn't Jewish. And at some point in my life, I figured out I was Protestant, but we didn't believe that. And we didn't practice that. And so my sister goes away to college at Illinois State University. It's her sophomore year, and in her life, she's pretty typical kind of, she's partying a bit, she's doing kind of things you do at college, but then she gets sick. She gets mono. And it's pretty.
This is her freshman year?
It's interesting. I think it's between her freshman and sophomore year, or maybe between her sophomore and junior year.
Gotcha.
But she gets mono, and she gets mono and then strep throat at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And so she's home during the summer, and she literally gets so sick she nearly dies. Now, again, looking back, I know that. At the time, I just remember my sister was in bed for a month or so and more. And so she was broken down that summer. And in that time, an old friend, a neighbor who had just gotten involved with Campus Crusade for Christ, dropped a note to her. And then later that fall, when she goes back to college, she hears the gospel and she trusts in Jesus. And so she comes home, and this sister Joan was a friend, a dear sister friend of mine. You know, she was outgoing and extroverted. She's 5-6 years older than I am. She's kind of cool, and I like her, and her friends paid attention to me occasionally.
Sure.
So it's just like she's a sister, is easy to talk to. She comes home from Christmas vacation in that December. I'm 13 years old, and she shared with me the gospel. Now that was a big deal right then to me, that you can see God preparing things, because as I mentioned, sports were a big deal to me. And again, I played Little League sports, baseball, I played basketball in the neighborhood, played anything else we could try, tennis and other things. But the 8th grade basketball team had tryouts, and I got cut. I was the 13th guy on a 12-person team. And so it was hard for me, and it was a sense not only of disappointment, but a sense of injustice, because 2 guys that made it were my friends, Ricky and Pete, and I was a better basketball player. I thought, and I even think they knew it, I was a better player than they were, and they made the team and I didn't. And, just put it this way, I could beat them one-on-one.
Yep.
And so I was devastated, and I was in a tailspin. That happened in November. That happened November of that year, late October in tryouts. And so I was cut loose into who am I, what is my, who are my friends? My best friends are now playing on the team. I'm not.
And you're 14.
13. Yeah,
13.
I'm in 8th grade.
And 13's a hard enough year anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to figure out how to, get into a new, and I was part of a huge middle school. My middle school had 1,000 kids in my grade, 7th grade, 1,000. So it's a 2,000 person middle school, then called junior high. So I'm lost, and I'm wondering who am I, what I'm doing. And I became angry with my friends. It wasn't their fault they made it, but I was angry at them. I was just angry at my family. I just felt like life was unfair. And then the gospel came along. My sister shared with me that Christmas. And somehow all that kind of clicked together. And Jesus said, I love you. I want to live as your Lord. I want to forgive you. And all of a sudden, in that January, just right after Christmas, I prayed to receive Christ.
Wow.
It's interesting. My sister had gone away back to college, and I actually prayed to receive Christ on my own. And I look back, and I can't remember her telling me how to pray that prayer or whatever, but it just shows the Holy Spirit made Christ clear to me, and I could just, so I can remember being so excited. I really did have that sort of early excitement. I opened up the Bible. She had given me this living Bible, and I started reading the Gospel of Matthew. She probably directed me that way.
Sure.
I started reading, and I read, and I read, and I read, and I started doing something never done. I started underlining the Bible and reading, and it became just a passion for me in that early moment.
And so that leads me actually to where I was going, which is, so you had this kind of dramatic shift in your life as a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
But your sister's, who's the one who introduced you, she's away at college.
Yeah, an hour and a half away at college.
So what were some of those early changes that you saw in your life? Obviously, you begin to read scripture, that has a form, but like what changed in your life at that time?
Well, so my sister is pretty outgoing as well, and I guess looking back now, she's the other extrovert in the family, the other rest. So she's ready to talk. She tells people about her faith. My parents are kind of skeptical, but I'm living there now. I'm in 8th grade now. And so I literally, this is kind of funny, Tony, now that I say it, but I'm in 8th grade. Can you imagine this? Your 8th grade son comes out of the bedroom for breakfast. And I often ate with my mom and dad before I ran down the street and caught the bus to school. So it's 7:30 in the morning. And I started bringing my Bible out to the kitchen table.
Wow.
And I would begin, and my parents thought, at first they thought it was cute, and they were happy to talk about it. And my parents are very open-minded.
But that wasn't a norm for your household at all.
Oh, no, that was bizarre.
Right.
Yeah. And I just began to read and talk, and again, I eventually, so then after weeks with my sister coming back from vacations and other times, it became clear she was pretty strong. I was kind of following in her wake. My parents began to feel like, whoa, you guys are getting a little too serious about this stuff.
Right.
And I can literally remember my parents saying, you're dividing our household.
Wow.
They said that. And I can remember feeling that little bit of uncertainty of how to deal with that. And at the same time, being kind of excited
of course.
that I had this new faith. And I've told people that in some ways, my teenage rebellion, I sinned in a lot of ways, but one of the ways I sinned was actually by being proud of being better than my parents. I knew something they didn't know. And so it's funny, it's so my spirituality, so that there's a negative to that, there's a positive, but there's a negative to that. And so I kind of had to negotiate that a little bit. I was probably a little obnoxious about my faith in those early moments.
So as high school goes on, how did that dynamic change at all? Did it change at all with your parents and you?
Yeah.
What did that look like?
Well, two ways it changed. One, I began to settle down a little bit and get connected to a church with a youth pastor and to a ministry called Campus Life, which had youth ministry groups and leaders who began to speak into my life and begin to help guide me in how to love my parents, how to live the Christian faith, how to be involved in that. The friction or the tension with my family was not huge. We got along well, but the tension was over how much time I spent. Because I was a busy high school kid. I'm the kid now. I'm playing sports in high school. I took a job when I was right after my freshman year. I started working, and I'm going to school, and then I'm going to youth group 2 to 3 nights a week.
Right.
You know, going to church Sunday morning and then youth group because that was my new family. My neighborhood and my grammar school friends, I continued with many of them to be friends, but now I had this new friend group, these Christian kids at the youth group and at the church, and they became dear and special friends. That became my real family. And so my family was a little worried about me being overcommitted, which of course is kind of like a life pattern. So but it was different for our family. And so they from time to time they would say, I think you're doing too much. I think it's going to take away from school. I think it's going to take away from us.
Right.
But it wasn't level 10. It was more of a 5 or 6 throughout.
Well, it's really encouraging to hear how the Lord sort of just showed up in your life very suddenly and brought you to himself. I want to fast forward a little bit. So you graduate high school and you go to Wheaton. Right. And there at Wheaton, you meet a woman named Judy. Who we know goes on to become your wife. You guys have been married now for 38 years.
Judy Henkel.
Judy Henkel was her name. So real quick, what year in Wheaton did you meet Judy?
So we're a little storybook. I mean, we met the first day of college.
Oh, wow.
We move in on whatever day that was. And again, you have to know college the way it was back then. There was no internet. There was no who's going to be your roommate. You show up at college your first day and you're introduced to your roommate. Dave Lovelace. Dave Lovelace is my roommate. He's from Boston.
Add him to the Hall of Fame of friend names,
Dave Lovelace, and actually famous because for those who are theological, his dad was Richard Lovelace. And so funny in terms of theological writers. But Dave Lovelace is my roommate. He's a kind of a crazy kid. And then our roommates, Dave had Mark and Mark Dutton, and I can't remember the fourth guy, but those 4 of us became a suite, right? We're a suite. Those 4 were then combined with 4 women across in another dorm. In the same dorm, but in the women's side. So we became a group of 8. And that first day we met, and Judy was in that group.
Interesting.
So she was in, actually, the symmetry of it is I was in 201 East. She was in 201 West.
Oh, it was written in the stars.
It was destined. But our rooms, we could, across a courtyard, we were in the same place. On the 5 floors, we were in that same second floor.
So you were in close proximity to Judy off the bat.
Right off the bat. We meet, I'm in a group of 8, but there's nothing. She's from Nebraska. She's the Midwest farmer's daughter. No, she's not, but I'm from Chicago, although a lot of you know that I spent 1 year in Mississippi, so it was a transitional year. But I'm back in Chicago area. I'm feeling excited to be at Wheaton. Judy's excited to be at Wheaton. Both of us are sort of ready to dig into Christian education and really learn a lot, and we're excited. We meet, and that group is put into 8 of us into a Bible study. So my first relationship with Judy was friendship, Bible study, sister in Christ, and that was really great.
So was there a moment
Yeah, there is. I mean, but it was pretty clear that I had interest in her.
Okay.
So what Judy and what I would do is at Wheaton, I didn't have a car, and freshmen are not allowed to have cars, and guys and girls are not allowed to each other's dorm rooms, and so you're going to meet people in the union, in the library. So Judy and I basically, we started studying together. A couple of us, she was part of a group, and we went over to the library and sat down and we studied because we were trying to be good students, but I kept distracting her and it was pretty clear after a couple weeks to months that I was interested. And I remember I asked her out. That was kind of a strange transition because, again, we're sitting together every night. But I said, would you like to go out for a cup of coffee?
Okay, so first date was coffee.
Yeah, and I can tell you and show you the place in downtown Wheaton. We walked after like 9 o'clock after we studied. We walked down to downtown Wheaton, which is a 5-minute walk. It's a little town. I tell people in St. Louis that Wheaton is like Kirkwood.
Right.
Has a railroad track. Imagine putting a Christian college in Kirkwood, and then you'd walk down to the downtown Kirkwood. Cool little places. Those called the Round the Clock Coffee Shop. We sat. I don't know if
is it still there?
No, it's been changed to the Eclectic Cafe, and we've been back before to celebrate.
Right.
So yeah, but there's a space right there. That's the little restaurant.
Okay.
Right, we can show you the spot, and we sat there and we just had a great time talking together. And Judy and I then, I was to put it in perspective, I was a little more sure. I was beginning to say I really like her. She was a little more reluctant.
That's always how it is, right? It's never equal.
No.
It's usually the guy. Let's be honest.
No, and the reality is. That's the story of the next few years.
Yeah.
I mean, we start dating together, kind of saying we're kind of exclusive in February or so. But I'm pretty much by the end of that freshman year, I'm thinking, I think she's the one.
Wow.
And but there's no hurry. I mean, there can't be. We got to go through college. But Judy, then we were apart that first summer, and that was horrible. I wrote her letters. We're together through the next year, and she can tell that I'm really interested, and she's nervous. And so I actually then, sophomore year, after sophomore summer, I should say, I moved to Lincoln, Nebraska. And this is a big part of my story, is that I moved to Lincoln to be near Judy. So I lived in an apartment and took classes there at Nebraska just so I could spend time. I worked a little bit just so I could be near her, and our dating continued. And so it deepened our relationship, but then it connected me to the PCA church.
Oh.
I'd never been involved with the PCA church.
So that was your introduction to the PCA.
So Judy is really the gateway for me to be involved in this PCA denomination. I had no connection to it.
Now, did her and her family have a prior involvement?
No, she had the same story that I had. She grew up outside really the faith, although she grew up a little more in a nominal Episcopal church.
Okay.
But then 8th grade, so in the same era, we both have a parallel. God took hold of her life in a very powerful moment at a renewal service within their church, where evangelical person came and said, you need to trust in Jesus. And she and her mom both received Christ at the same time.
Wow.
Her 8th grade year. And so then she goes through a similar thing.
Right.
High school, church, youth group, and then her senior year she gets connected to this little PCA church.
Wow.
And then that's when I come back, that's who invites me back in to get to know. So
and that church is still there in Nebraska?
Yes, that church has grown and multiplied, and that's the church I went to work for when I left Wheaton, and we were married later.
Well, let's go there then. So you graduate Wheaton, you and Judy marry right as you graduate.
Yeah, we finished early. We were in love, so we said let's hurry through college. She finished the semester early, so January of our senior year, our 4th year. So we moved to Nebraska together, and now I'm. So I start working for a rousing $300 a month. This is a church now. When I say this church is 35 people. It's a small church that is faithful to the Lord, but it meets in a house.
Right.
And the church has a new pastor, and he's a guy that was a friend of Judy's. Actually, he was actually a campus life leader of Judy's, who now has gone to seminary. He's 29 years old. I'm 21, and his name is Marlon Wismer, and everybody called him Wiz, because he was kind of a wizard of theology. And so Marlon was the guy that he was a good friend now of mine, and so he asked me, would you work with me to help reach this community? So I took a job with him, $300 a month, which meant I had to work and Judy's dad gave me a job.
And this is your first ministry
Yep,
kind of experience,
1982.
jumping in.
I'm just sitting there, and we decided, hey, let's try to figure out what to do. So we said, let's reach the college ministry.
Right.
The University of Nebraska is there, 20-some thousand students, and I had not gone to a state university, but I knew college students, and so God just opened the door, and Judy and I got married in February and moved into an apartment.
Wow.
10 minutes from campus, and started a college ministry and served in the church for the next 5 years.
Wow.
I thought I'd be there for a year or two. I thought, I'm getting out of college, I'm like, I'll do this a year or two, then I'll go to graduate school, maybe
Right.
seminary. I didn't know if I wanted to be a professor. I didn't know what I wanted to do
Right.
totally. And I fell in love with ministry right then. That's 82, 83, 84, 85. Those were the years that changed Judy and my life, but my life in terms of ministry, I just fell in love with the church.
So you start to get a call, a sense of, I want to do ministry. Eventually that leads to, I want to be trained in ministry.
Yeah.
Which is where the Hugh Barlett road, the Hugh and Judy road, begins to crane over to St. Louis,
Right.
because you want to get trained at Covenant Theological Seminary here in St. Louis. So you go to Covenant.
Right.
And you went to Covenant, to my understanding, with the idea that after you get your degree at Covenant, you were going to go back to Nebraska. That's
Right.
correct?
And that was the plan. We just felt God was doing so many good things in Lincoln, had so many relationships. We were going to go back and plant a daughter church
Right.
out of the original church. The church it was 30 and now grown up to 220, 250. And we were a part of that. The college ministry had flourished, and we had seen God
Right.
expand that. We were just so thrilled. So I looked for a way to go to seminary and stay connected. And so I literally went to seminary, but I drove every month. Judy and I drove back to Lincoln. We were there, the year and a half we were in St. Louis. Every month we drove back to Nebraska to stay connected. The church paid for our seminary.
Wow.
So all our tuition was paid for. And we went back right after graduate. Well, didn't even graduate, finished a little early, and went back and took over, was ready to plant a church. That was our...
So your ministry expectations, again, were all in Lincoln.
Yeah.
That's where yet something happened. Something came in to change your perspective on a call to potentially to St. Louis. How did that shift take place?
Yeah, and that's a big part of, that's what I almost call that my growing up era in terms of, we got married, but marriage for Judy and I was not, it was just delightful. It wasn't that difficult. Then we had children.
I don't think anybody else has ever experienced that before.
So children is like, whoa, now we both are growing up now. We have
Right.
Sarah, and then not too many years, a year or two later, Katie, and all of a sudden we've got that. But the bigger part of growing up was this, the mentor, that Marlon Wismer, who was our mentor, in the time I was away, and then when I just returned back, he burned out. He broke down. It was some challenges in his life took him out of the ministry. And so the whole plan was he would be the senior pastor, I would go plant a church, and all of a sudden that just blew up.
Wow.
And so also in that time, a lot of you have heard the story, but Judy's mother, who was a dear, special person in her life, who'd been sick with cancer, she died. So we had the baby, Sarah, in August. Judy's mom died 10 days later.
Wow.
Marlon collapsed, and not physically, but just emotionally, and decided to leave in probably October.
Wow.
So the church plant went on hold. I became the senior pastor.
Wow.
So I eventually, through some things, so I became the pastor of the church I'd been the assistant pastor for.
Right.
It made a lot of sense. The people knew me. It was great. But it was harder than I thought it would be.
Sure.
And again, it was great, and the church was doing well in a lot of ways. But there was a transition where the dream had changed. So I was there about 3 years as that pastor, and then got a call from St. Louis, and people have asked me, those in Lincoln especially, who knew me, why did you leave?
Yeah.
And there were lots of good things, and I didn't feel any pressure to leave, but I think what it was is that God had put within me this sense of a dream or a design for ministry that I just didn't think could happen in that church there. In other words, I was beginning to feel like these are the things that I think are significant and important in ministry, and they kind of went back all the way back to my early Christian experience, where I grew up, to be a church that was a little more open to people who didn't grow up in the church.
Right.
And
you saw that opportunity
Yeah.
with this church in St. Louis.
so I got the call. Yeah, I can remember. It was a Monday night football game. I'm literally watching Monday Night Football.
Who was playing?
Yeah, I can't remember that.
Oh,
but
come on.
I remember the phone, again, with a cord on it.
Right.
Phone rings,
Yep.
and I'm on the phone, and I didn't turn off the TV.
Was the phone on the wall, or was it down?
No, it was down.
Sometimes you had those phones on the wall back then.
No,
I
that's
remember.
right. No, we moved beyond that, but took the phone. I remember I didn't turn the game off. Somebody said, I'm from St. Louis, and I just turned the volume down and just listened. I knew I wasn't going to be interested.
Right.
And so I just but they began to talk about our church is looking for a pastor. We're in this community of suburban St. Louis. The funny thing is I'd been in St. Louis in seminary,
Yeah.
but I'd never been in Baldwin.
Interesting.
I lived in the city and never actually driven out to this area. I mean,
Wow.
I even think back now. I think there was a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant called Bobo China, right at 141 in Lamp and Lantern. That's as far as I got. We drove over there for lunch a couple times when I was
Really?
in seminary. Yep, that's the only time I'd ever been in West County.
Interesting.
Didn't even know what was out here.
Okay.
And but then began to wonder about suburban ministry in a place that really needed the gospel. The church was struggling. Then I got to know a few of the folks on the pulpit committee, and I really was moved to think about, I wonder if God would lead me there. And that started a few months real sort of seeking and guiding, and then all of a sudden it just came about.
So that takes place in about 1992, right?
Right.
And it seems like the Lord put on your heart the idea of what your gifts, what your passions are to reach folks that maybe are typically unchurched in a suburban context, something that you're familiar with.
Right.
This seemed like the right spot.
Absolutely.
But now that's back in 1992, and since then, how many years have gone by?
28 years,
28
half
years.
my life.
So 28 years have gone by
Yeah.
since you started here at CPC. I want to ask this question to you. In the last 20, 25 years, how has ministry changed? I mean, you think of the early, mid-90s, that vision of who you want to reach. Now we're 2020.
Right.
What are the things that are the same, and what are the things that are a little bit
Right.
different about this place that you're ministering in?
It's interesting because it's interesting, Tony. We, after a few months here, the elders and myself, we came up with this phrase, living for Christ so that others might live.
Right.
And that's never changed.
No.
28 years. And I remember thinking about that very strongly at the time, that I wanted it to be more than just believing in something, but actually living. And so that hasn't changed. In other words, the idea that God's grace that in Christ could be communicated through the gospel, the word of the gospel, in relationships.
Right.
That's really been a hallmark of our experience here, to be open to people who grew up in the church, but those who haven't, and begin to live that gospel out and to lead other people into relationship with Christ. That was my experience growing up, and now I couldn't be happier to be part of a church for this many years where I've seen that happening, and just couldn't be more amazed at how that's happened. Now, as to what's changed, I mean, obviously the size and the scope.
Sure.
We've added all these ministries, but I guess a couple dynamics. One, I would say this: the things that what's changed is the beautiful people, the gifted people that God has added to our team. That's one, and that's so they're just, obviously the Owen, the Jeff, the Tony, the Just. I mean, there's again all the staff, the Allie, the Linda Lloyd, all those great people, and that's just the story. Not to mention all the elders and deacons. Sure, but I would say the big changes are two. One of the biggest changes is what's happened to us. And this is life. And I would say it this way, that we had this belief in the grace of God, but I never realized the grace of God it's that passage in Corinthians about getting stronger when you get weaker. Our church has gone through just an immense amount of struggle.
Right.
People getting depressed, people having marital struggle, people having addictions to pornography, people having real sin, and it happened not just out in the periphery, but in the middle of our church. And those kind of breakdowns, rather than destroying our church, actually deepened our church. That's been one of the big surprises, and that actually revolutionized my view of ministry. I used to think the wise leader was the guy who steered around problems.
Right.
And those many years where we just had problem after problem, now I realize those problems actually, when we stay in Christ, they actually deepen and develop our faith.
Right.
And we've seen those well, all of us who've had broken experiences actually be rebuilt. And so that's been a beautiful thing. And then along with that, just practically, I'd just say it this way, the generations have changed. And so I would say, just generations, my generation, your generation.
Right.
One of the big differences is the emphasis on mercy and mission in your generation. And that's something that isn't really, it's not owned by your generation, but it's something that's loved by your generation.
Right.
And so our church has grown in that as we've had younger and that new, fresh kind of we didn't even know the word missional, did we?
Right.
I mean, that was something you heard, but I didn't go to seminary. I didn't think I heard that word in 1987 or 89. But now, so the two awakenings, maybe the two ways I describe it are really the missional movement and the emotional health movement. The understanding relational spirituality as something that involves a real grace infused spirituality.
And hearing you talk about those things, I mean, over the span of 28 years, that's a lot.
Yeah.
You talk about staff turnover, you talk about difficulty and challenge coming, you talk about generational shifts, and then you talk about things that were emphasized for you, that now that there's a kind of a new kind of crop of folks coming on emphasizing. That's a lot to weather and to navigate as a senior pastor of a church for 28 years. And I think what's really, really neat about it is it's really a legacy, not your own legacy, but it's really the legacy of God's goodness, God's faithfulness. Seeing a church that, as you mentioned, was struggling and using one person, but also a host of people over the course of 28 years to further his church and to further that vision that you mentioned of living for Christ so that others may live. Even though there's been challenge and difficulty and change in the midst of that, there's really a lot to give thanks for and a lot to give God a lot of glory for.
I'm at the age now where these kind of stories are not just stories to me, they're just real fixtures of my faith now.
Sure.
But it's just that God's faithfulness of just raising up the next generation, building ministries and mission. All the various things. I look at like a New Hope counseling. I remember we didn't have a counseling center.
Yeah, that's right.
A preschool. I remember we didn't have a preschool, homeschool network. I remember when we didn't have a crossfire ministry, and I remember when we didn't have a mission to the city in the way that Owen has developed it. Or they're just numbers of various parts of our mission.
Right.
I'm just amazed to see God put those together. And of course, the programs are kind of symbolic of all the people that have been a part of it. So I just couldn't be more amazed. When I'm standing in it, it seems like nothing's happening. It takes too long. But of course, then looking back, it's like, well, God's been doing lots of things.
Well, I think that's one of the sweeter parts of being a pastor who's been called to a place for this long of time is the ability to step back. I know in the middle of the ministry fight, there's it just seems like there's a lot going on, or it seems like nothing's going on. But again, what you just said, the ability to stand back and look over a span of 28 years and say, look at what the Lord has done, look at what the Lord has built, and I'm sure you find some sense of joy and just seeing how faithful He's been.
Right, and. That's right. I feel a lot of comfort from the Lord that He's been faithful. It's funny, though, these last months haven't been comfortable, of course.
No.
The COVID comes, and we're rebuilding our church, replanning it again. So now we've got outdoor services and online. We're doing a Sunday school class that's online, and we're learning new skills. But in the same way, it's all the same story, and it's all the same work of the gospel.
Well, I want to throw you a curveball in the middle of that. So this is going to be something we do every week called the What If Mirror.
Yeah.
And so the What If Mirror is this. You're taking a mirror, you look at yourself, you can see yourself, but it's a What If mirror. So it's what if Hugh and Judy were not called into ministry? What if back in 1982, wherever it was, you decided, no, ministry's not going to be my thing?
Yeah.
Think back, what do you think, what if the Lord had called you to something else? What would that thing have been that you could have seen the Lord taking you into?
It's interesting, the easy answer is what I thought I was going to do when I was leaving Wheaton College, and I'd enjoy studying, that I thought I was going to be a professor.
Wow.
I thought I was going to be probably pursuing a master's, probably a PhD in church history or theology and teaching at a seminary or something like that. But honestly, that's what I thought I would do. And there are moments now when I think, what if I'd done that? And I enjoy, and I get to preach and teach, but I think about that. But honestly, I don't think that's really my personality when I think about it, the clerical nature of that. Why didn't I do that? God called me to ministry. What do I love about ministry? Well, the variety of it.
Right.
And so I honestly, if I think about it, I wouldn't be surprised that if I had been involved in some kind of business venture that was entrepreneurial, that the scholar part of me is just a little too repetitive. I think I may have ended up somehow in business starting something. I remember I was asked in my interview, I was asked when I was interviewing for this job years ago,
right.
28 years ago. They said, what would you do if you weren't doing this? And I remember answering, I'd be a general manager of a professional sports team.
Now that's a winner right there.
And putting together the players to win a championship. And I remember him looking at me like, this guy's out of his mind. But I was dead serious. That sounded like a great job to me.
Yeah, you would have loved that.
And I could see, now again, would I be able to do that? But I could see myself putting together people in an organization. And that's actually a lot of who I am.
Well, I'll call John Mosaic and tell him that you're out for his job.
The Cards are waiting for their next big
right.
move. That's always there.
We have a few minutes left, Hugh, and we're going to kind of have a few fun questions to end. But before we get there, I really wanted, we spend so much time as a congregation benefiting from the fact that the Lord has equipped you to preach to us and to use His Word and really unveil His Word and show His Word to us and to teach us His Word. Yeah. You spend so much time on that stage right over there, again, giving the word to your people and His people. What's a part of Scripture, maybe a verse, maybe a phrase, whatever it might be, that over the course of your testimony has shaped you personally?
Yeah.
That has been something not necessarily you've sent to people, but has been sent to you from the Lord in His Word that has just helped build you in a sense of your spirituality in Him?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it's fundamental. I think Ephesians 2:8-9 was probably the passage that was shared with me in the gospel. But as I'm sitting here right now, the idea that salvation is a gift by God's grace. And I don't think I'll ever get beyond that, and that's beautiful. But if you're going to ask me what like a personal shaping, it goes back to a time just before I came here in 1990, 91. I was struggling, I think, with a sense of where I'm going, what I'm doing, maybe just finishing seminary. Matthew chapter 20, there's a story of the parable of the vineyard, and it's a story, the one where basically Jesus hires the workers, and He hires some early in the morning, and in the end He pays them all the same amount.
That's right.
And they're frustrated. They're like, I worked all day, I got the same amount, you worked only an hour, and I understand now all the theological and cultural, but it was a time I read that passage, and it was just as if God Himself was speaking right to me, because the punchline of the story is twofold. It's God says to the workers, do I not have the right to do with what is mine,
right,
what I desire? And then the second thing is, are you jealous? Are you envious if I'm generous? And so what this points out, the reason this is so meaningful to me is I was in a time in my life story, basically I was becoming a pastor, I was becoming a little more able, a little more successful, but I still felt this sense of a lot of my friends, a lot of my family don't respect what I do. And then also, I'm not seeing a lot of rewards financially, and I see a lot of guys I went to college with that I felt like they're ahead of me,
right? And
I'm falling behind. And then even other pastors that I thought, I'm a better pastor than they are,
right?
And so that passage has been so powerful to me, with God saying, Hugh, I have the right to call you to whatever I desire to call you. And then, are you going to be unhappy the rest of your life if other people are blessed in ways that you aren't? And I think I had to struggle with that. For a long time, I was like, well, yeah, I'm going to be unhappy.
Right.
But these are the lessons. Later, we read the book, The Prodigal God, and we understood a little bit about the elder brother.
Right.
And I was struggling with the elder brother sin, the idea that because I was close to God, I stayed around the family farm, that God I had earned my salvation, and I was losing sight. So that for me is a constant time and relearning of the gospel. So for me in ministry, I would say the most refreshing and important thing for me to remember as a pastor is, well, I mentioned in the sermon last week, is that I'm a beggar with other beggars looking for bread.
That's right.
And to not think of myself as a baker, but a beggar. that idea that God's good gift in the vineyard is enough for me. So
Well, it's so encouraging to hear, and I think it's really important that we get these windows into pastors and teachers. Oftentimes, that this word that they teach so well also is very personal to them and is shaping. So thank you for sharing that, and it's really, really insightful to see your story and how that makes sense that parable would be shaping for you. So
and if you think about it, it even fits It's a Wonderful Life.
Absolutely.
And why it means so much to me.
Right, you're going full circle, man. It's like you're a pastor. Or something.
It wraps all around. I mean, it's that sense, and that's where God knowing us and loving us is enough.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, that's really, really beautiful. Hugh, thank you for spending time sharing and walking through your story a little bit. Again, one of the purposes of deep dives is so that we can have a little bit more of a personal angle. And I think we've learned a lot about your story, but more importantly, seeing how these themes of your story point us to the Lord and point us to His grace in a really, really cool way. We're going to end every deep dives on a little bit of a silly note,
Sure.
which I'm going to call the rapid fire wrap up.
Yep.
Now, the rapid fire wrap up is a series of 5 questions. I can't promise you that it'll just be 5. I might get curious and throw a few more in there.
It's all right. I'll go fast.
But these are a way for us to learn a couple of things that maybe we wouldn't normally know about you, Hugh.
Yep.
So are you ready for the rapid fire wrap up?
Absolutely. Fire away.
Here we go. Your favorite band?
Okay, I'm going to hedge on this. I'm going to say Chicago and the Doobie Brothers.
Okay, Chicago. Best song from either of those bands?
Well, for the Doobie Brothers, it's Another Park, Another Sunday.
Wow.
Which is actually a more subtle song.
That is.
They've got some, and Chicago, wow. Searching.
Searching's a
that
good one.
spiritually was a powerful, it was sort of connected to that.
Okay, I like that. All right. So we learned a little bit about your musical taste there.
Yeah.
Your guilty pleasure restaurant?
Again, I can't limit it, but I love Mexican food. Mi Lupita. But I do, I used to do that often.
I'll say COVID has broke up your Mi Lupita
But
streak.
the other one is Mai Lee,
That's
the
right.
Vietnamese restaurant there in Brentwood.
Down in Brentwood.
Yeah, that's a secret place we go. Judy and I go there.
What's your favorite dish at Mi Lupita? So our viewers know, you've been going to Mi Lupita for how long?
Yeah, well, Mark Davis, our youth pastor, and he loved Mexican food, and I liked it. But we found that restaurant when it was just a hole in the wall at New Baldwin in Manchester, and it was in a different location actually. And it was $5.95 for the lunch special, and the chicken burrito deluxe was
chicken burrito.
I think
deluxe.
I ate that Monday for lunch, for 10 years straight. I now branch out, but it's a go-to.
It is a good go-to.
It's a go-to.
We'll see if the sales of the burrito deluxe actually go up. People viewing this.
Product placement. I think they've gotten busier already in recent years.
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So we got food covered.
Yeah.
Now this is a little personal one for me.
Yeah.
Your favorite Star Wars character?
Yeah, no, and that's interesting. Again, I was in high school when Star Wars came out.
Right.
And I've never gotten over my favorite character is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Is Alec Guinness. Is the Alec Guinness character, the original little shadowy figure who comes back in little holograms, and again, here I'm a young Christian guy, and he says, "Strike me down, I'll come back stronger."
That's
I mean,
right.
that you don't get any bigger than that.
No, you can preach that pretty easily.
No, that was.
I knew I liked you, Hugh.
Yeah.
Obi-Wan is objectively the best Star Wars character for anyone.
And
who's
his
wondering.
voice, Alec Guinness, is unbelievable.
It's the best.
Yeah.
It is the best. 2 more for you: mountains or ocean?
Yeah, and that's easy. I'm a mountainous guy.
Yeah, you're a mountain
and
guy.
it probably shows. I'm not technically an albino, but my red hair and freckles.
You don't jive with the beach very well?
I sunburn and then it goes away, and then I burn and it goes away. So
that's right.
So the mountains I cover up there too, but it's a little easier to be in the mountains.
Favorite mountain that you've hiked?
Oh well, wow, that's hard. But I love the area outside of Leadville, beautiful outside of Buena Vista. So there's Buena Vista down there in Colorado.
That's right.
Judy and I have had some great times just hiking around there. Pretty amazing.
And now your son Dan is a mountain climber.
Yeah, he's a mountaineer,
which is a source of pride and also
fear.
being terrified at the same time.
It is a source of terror. he actually climbs and boulders and does all that stuff. He's living out in Estes, Fort Collins area.
That's
so
really fun.
Every weekend he does.
So last question, what's at the top of your bucket list? We all have got bucket lists, whether we list them out or name them. What's the top of your bucket? Something that Hugh Barlett really can't wait to do at some point.
Well, I think it's, I would say it's not the one, but it's the next big trout fishing outdoor mountain trip that I'm going to do. I don't know what that is yet. We've kind of been limited. Last night on YouTube, I watched a spot, and my son-in-law is going to be excited to hear this if he watches this tape. There's a Highway 20 in Idaho where there's 6 rivers that run through there.
Oh, wow.
I've started thinking the Snake River, the Henry Fork, it's not, wouldn't it be fun to take 4 days and do something like that? So yeah, it would be somewhere in the mountains, trout fishing, that kind of thing.
That's really fun.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for those windows into you, Hugh.
Fun to hang out with you, Tony.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Fun to share it with the congregation.
It is.
And,
so we're going to continue to have folks like Hugh over the next few weeks. Next week, we're going to be having Justin Hinch come and join us. And the week after that, it'll be Allie Vining. So thank you for watching Deep Dives. Remember, you can catch us on YouTube Live, our YouTube channel, and you can also find us on live stream. Every single week, posted at about 7 a.m. in the morning on Sunday morning, you'll be able to find these. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Take care.